Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. Man, I'm still trying to process what happened to me last week. My hands still shake just remembering it. I've been a truck driver for over 20 years. I've crossed the United States from coast to coast several times, and I thought I'd seen it all on this life on the road. But what happened that night in the middle of the Arizona desert? My God, I've never felt so scared. It was a Tuesday. I was doing a routine trip from Los Angeles to Phoenix. I left LA late because of a last-minute mechanical problem, so it was already past midnight when I got on Interstate 10. The night was darker than pitch, no moon, and a warm breeze was kicking up the desert dust. I turned on the high beams and kept going. After all, I know this road like the back of my hand. After about 3 hours of driving, I started to feel that pressure in my bladder. You know how it is, right? We drink coffee to stay awake, and then there's no way around it. Normally, I can hold it, but that night, it was tough. I saw a sign indicating a rest area a few miles ahead, and decided I'd make a quick stop. When I got there, I regretted it immediately. The place was practically abandoned, poorly lit by some old flickering lampposts. There wasn't a soul around, just my truck parked in that empty lot, surrounded by nothing but sand and some dry bushes. I looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. A shiver ran up my spine, but I really needed to go to the bathroom. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, locked the truck, and walked towards the rest area building, feeling the hot, dry desert air on my face and hearing only the sound of my footsteps on the cracked asphalt and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. I entered the bathroom, and man, what a sinister place. The walls had strange graffiti, the floor was filthy, and the fluorescent lights flickered as if they were about to go out at any moment. I did what I had to do as quickly as possible, feeling watched the whole time. When I came out of the stall, I almost had a heart attack. I swear I saw a shadow quickly pass by the broken mirror. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart was racing. I washed my hands in a sink that looked more like a nest of germs and left there practically running. I went back to the parking lot, and that's when things got even stranger. There was a figure standing near my truck. It was a tall, thin guy, dressed all in black. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the darkness, but I felt like he was staring at me. I froze in place, not knowing what to do. Default text me throat went dry, my legs weak. The guy didn't move. He looked like a statue. After what seemed like an eternity, he simply turned his back and disappeared into the darkness of the desert. I stood there for a good few minutes, trying to understand what had happened. Was I imagining things? Was fatigue playing tricks on me? I took a deep breath, tried to calm down, and went to the truck, looking in all directions, expecting that weirdo to appear again. I got to the truck and realized something was wrong. The driver's side door, which I was sure I had locked, was ajar. My heart raced again. I stood there, staring at the door, not daring to open it. What if the guy had gotten in? What if he was still inside? I swallowed hard and with a trembling hand, slowly opened the door. There was no one there, but the interior was a mess. My backpack was open, with everything scattered across the seat. The glove compartment was also open, with papers all messed up. But worst of all was the smell. A strong, strange smell that I had never smelled before. It was a mixture of sulfur and something rotten that made my stomach turn. I started rummaging through everything, trying to see if anything had been taken. That's when I found the note. A crumpled piece of paper stuffed between the seat and the gear shift. When I opened it, I almost fell over. Written in a crooked and irregular handwriting was the message, "You shouldn't have stopped here." It's too late now. I'm watching you and I'll follow you to the end of the line. Man, at that moment, I froze. My mind started spinning, thinking 1,000 things at once. Who was this lunatic? Why was he doing this to me? What did he mean by "to the end of the line"? I was completely terrified, not knowing what to do. Staying there seemed crazy, but getting back on the road knowing someone might be following me didn't seem like a good idea either. I sat there, paralyzed in the driver's seat, for a good few minutes. My head was racing, trying to decide what to do. Go back to LA? Continue to Phoenix? Call the police? No option seemed good enough. That's when I noticed something strange on the truck's dashboard. The fuel gauge was almost on empty. Impossible. I had filled up the tank before leaving LA. There was no way I could have used all that in just a few hours. I froze. That son of a bitch had punctured my tank. Now I was really screwed. I didn't have enough fuel to go back, and the next town was still far away. I felt the panic growing inside me, my breathing becoming rapid. I decided I couldn't stay there. I had to do something. I started the engine, praying I had enough fuel to get somewhere safe. That's when I saw it in the rearview mirror. A faint light came on at the back of the parking lot. It was a motorcycle headlight. My blood ran cold. The motorcycle started moving slowly in my direction. I couldn't see the rider clearly, but I knew it was him, the guy in black. Without thinking twice, I floored the accelerator. The tires screeched on the asphalt, and I shot out of there like a rocket. I looked in the rearview mirror every second, watching the motorcycle light getting more and more distant. But something told me it wasn't over. The guy had said he would follow me to the end of the line, and I had a terrible feeling he was serious. I drove like a madman for about 20 minutes, always keeping an eye on the rearview mirror. I couldn't see the motorcycle light anymore, but that didn't reassure me at all. The fuel gauge was dropping too fast for my liking, and I knew I wouldn't get very far. That's when I saw a sign, Quartzsite 5 miles. I had never been so happy to see the name of a small town in the middle of nowhere. Quartzsite was small, but at least it should have a gas station, and with luck, a police station. I slowed down, trying to save what little fuel I had left. Praying to make it there, I entered the town almost out of gas, the truck's engine sputtering. The streets were deserted, lit only by a few yellowish streetlights. I spotted a gas station on the right and practically threw myself at it. The truck died as soon as I pulled in. I jumped out, looking around like a madman. The place seemed empty, but there was a small light on in the office. I ran over there and started banging on the door like a desperate man. An elderly man, looking sleepy, opened the door. "What the hell?" he started to say, but I interrupted him, pouring out the whole story to him. I talked about the stop, the strange guy, the note, the punctured tank. The old man looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of confusion and concern. When I finished, breathless, he was silent for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Son, there hasn't been any rest area on that part of the highway for over 30 years. I stood there, mouth agape, staring at the old man. My mind was trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean there was no rest area?" I had stopped there, used the bathroom, seen the strange guy. It was real. I couldn't have imagined it all. But I stopped there. I stammered, feeling a chill down my spine. The old man looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Look, son, that stretch of I-10 is known for strange things. I've heard other stories similar to yours. Some people say it's a kind of portal." He hesitated before continuing. "They say sometimes a ghost rest area appears, and those who stop there, well, let's say they attract unwanted attention. At that moment, I heard the sound of an engine in the distance. My heart raced. I turned quickly and saw a headlight approaching on the road. The old man noticed my panic and said, "Come on, let's get inside. I'll call the sheriff." He pulled me into the office and locked the door. He picked up the phone and started dialing, while I stood there, paralyzed, looking out the window. The headlight was getting closer and closer, and I could hear the engine getting louder. It was a motorcycle, I'm sure. It stopped across the street, right in front of the gas station. The rider turned off the engine, but left the headlight on, pointed directly at us. I couldn't see his face because of the light, but I knew it was him, the guy in black. He stood there motionless, as if he was watching us. The old man finished talking on the phone and came over to me. "The sheriff's coming," he said, but his voice trembled a little. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the motorcycle. The old man looked and turned pale. "My God," he whispered, "it's him. The night traveler." "The night traveler?" I repeated, feeling a shiver run through my body. The old man nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the figure on the motorcycle. "It's a legend around these parts," he began to explain, his voice low and trembling. "They say he appears to lonely travelers, always at night, always near that stretch of road. Nobody knows who he is or what he wants, but those who encounter him. Well, let's say they're never the same again." I swallowed hard, remembering the note. To the end of the line, he had written. Did this mean he would never leave me alone? We stood there, paralyzed, looking out the window. The night traveler remained motionless on his motorcycle, the headlight blinding us. Suddenly, we heard sirens in the distance. The relief I felt was momentary, because the next instant, the mysterious biker started his engine. He stayed there for a few more seconds, as if he was challenging us, and then, in a quick motion, turned the motorcycle around and accelerated, disappearing into the darkness of the desert night. A few minutes later, the sheriff's car arrived, lights flashing. The sheriff, a stocky middle-aged man, entered the office looking confused and a little irritated at being called at that hour. I started telling my story again, this time with the old man from the gas station confirming the part about the night traveler. The sheriff listened to everything with an increasingly serious expression on his face. The sheriff was silent for a moment after I finished telling everything. He exchanged a significant look with the old man from the gas station before turning to me. "Look, son," he began, scratching the back of his neck. "It's not the first time I've heard a story like this. This stretch of I-10 has a reputation, but we've never been able to prove anything concrete." He paused, as if choosing his words. "I'm going to file your report and take a look at your truck. As for this night traveler, well, let's say he officially doesn't exist. I spent the next few hours there at the gas station, answering questions from the sheriff and another officer who arrived later. They examined my truck and confirmed that the tank had been punctured. They found the note too, but said there were no fingerprints other than mine. The old man from the gas station let me use the phone to call my boss and explain the situation. It was already dawning when we finished everything. The sheriff offered me a ride to the town's hotel, saying it was better for me to rest a bit before continuing my journey. As I was getting my things from the truck, I noticed something strange on the windshield. There was a handprint, as if someone had touched it. But it wasn't a normal mark. It looked burned into the glass. I felt a chill in my stomach and decided not to say anything to the sheriff. It had already been a long enough night, and I just wanted to get out of there. I spent the whole day at the hotel, trying to rest, but I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sinister figure watching me. The strange smell from the truck seemed to have impregnated my clothes, constantly reminding me of what had happened. In the afternoon, I received news that my truck was repaired and ready to continue the journey. Part of me wanted to take a bus back to LA and never set foot on a road again, but I knew I couldn't do that. It was my livelihood after all. So, with my heart in my hand, I prepared to get back on the road as the sun began to set. Before leaving, the sheriff came to talk to me. He looked worried. "Look, we don't usually do this, but given the circumstances," he handed me a small radio. "It's a direct channel to our central. Anything strange you see or feel, don't hesitate to call. We'll be keeping an eye on you until the state border." I thanked him, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. I picked up the truck at the gas station, and with the last lights of the day fading on the horizon, I got back on I-10. Every mile I drove was torture. My eyes kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see that motorcycle appear at any moment. The radio the sheriff had given me was on, emitting only a low, constant static that somehow made me even more nervous. The hours dragged on as I drove down the dark road. Every shadow, every reflection in the mirrors made me jump. The surrounding desert seemed more threatening than ever, as if hiding terrible secrets. Every now and then, I'd grab my cell phone to check if I still had a signal, but it was useless. I was completely out of range. I only had that radio softly buzzing to keep me company. Around AM, I started to feel my eyes getting heavy. The fatigue from the previous night and the constant tension were taking their toll. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, the lights on the truck's dashboard started flashing. The radio, which until then had only emitted a soft static, exploded in a deafening noise. It was a mixture of static and something that sounded like whispers. I tried to turn it off, but it didn't work. And then, above all that noise, I clearly heard a voice. "End of the line, friend." I froze. It was the same voice I had heard at the ghost rest area. At that same instant, I saw in the rearview mirror a motorcycle light approaching at high speed. I panicked. I floored the accelerator, the truck roaring down the deserted road. But the light kept getting closer. I don't know how long that crazy chase lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. I was blind with fear, driving like a maniac, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of the motorcycle against the truck. That's when I saw the lights of a city approaching. Phoenix. I had never been so happy to see a city in my life. As soon as I entered the city limits, the motorcycle light disappeared. The radio stopped that infernal noise, returning to normal static. I drove straight to the first police station I found and practically collapsed into the arms of the officers on duty. In the days that followed, I gave several statements. The Phoenix police got in touch with the Quartzsite sheriff, who confirmed part of my story. But they never found any trace of the so-called night traveler. The rest of my trip was made with police escort, and since then, I've never driven alone at night again. I asked for a transfer to daytime and shorter routes. I know a lot of people don't believe my story. They think it was stress or hallucination from fatigue. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And to this day, when I close my eyes, I can hear that voice whispering, "End of the line, friend." I just hope that whatever that thing was, it stayed behind, lost on that road in the middle of the desert. It was my first month as a truck driver. I, Ashley, 28 years old, had just gotten my CDL commercial driver's license and was desperate for work. It was 2019, and the economic situation wasn't easy at all. My father, who had been a truck driver his whole life, had recently suffered a stroke, and the hospital bills kept piling up. My mother was taking care of him full-time, so the responsibility of supporting the household fell on me. That Thursday night, I was sitting on the worn-out couch in our living room in a Chicago suburb, staring at my cell phone, mentally begging for it to ring with a job offer. As if the universe had heard my silent prayers, the phone vibrated in my hand. It was an unknown number. I answered with my heart in my throat, and a deep voice on the other end asked if I could do an urgent transport. The man spoke quickly, with an accent I couldn't identify. He explained that the original driver had backed out at the last minute, and that they desperately needed someone to take a load from Chicago to Denver that very night. The pay was tempting, almost double what I would normally earn for a trip of that size. Without thinking twice, I accepted the job. Little did I know that impulsive decision would change my life forever. Less than an hour later, I was already behind the wheel of my 2018 Freightliner Cascadia, a truck I had managed to finance with my dad's help before the stroke. The cold autumn air was coming through the cracked window as I drove through the streets of Chicago towards the address the mysterious man had given me. It was a warehouse in a somewhat run-down industrial area on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, I noticed there was no sign identifying the company, just a faded number on the gray concrete wall. Two burly men, wearing black coveralls with no identification, were already waiting for me. They barely looked at me as they quickly loaded several large, heavy boxes into the trailer. I tried to make conversation, ask about the contents of the cargo, but they completely ignored me. A chill ran down my spine. Something didn't seem right, but the money was too good for me to back out now. When they finished, one of them handed me the paperwork to sign. I noticed the documents were vague, mentioning only electronic equipment as the cargo description. I hesitated for a second, but ended up signing. The man took the papers back, gave me a cold look, and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't stop anywhere until Denver." Understood? With a lump in my throat, I nodded and got into the cab. My hands were shaking slightly when I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared, breaking the sinister silence of that place. As I maneuvered to leave the warehouse, I saw the two men watching me with impassive looks in the rearview mirror. I accelerated, eager to leave that place behind, but the feeling of discomfort stayed with me. The first few hours on the road were quiet. Night was falling quickly, and soon I was surrounded by darkness, with only the truck's headlights and the occasional lights of other vehicles to keep me company. I tried to distract myself by turning on the radio, but nothing seemed to shake off the uneasiness growing inside me. That's when I heard it for the first time. A muffled sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the trailer. At first, I thought it was just the normal road noise, but as I paid more attention, I realized there was something different. It was as if something, or someone, was moving back there. My heart started beating faster. "Don't be ridiculous, Ashley," I told myself. "It's just electronic equipment, remember?" But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was terribly wrong. The hours dragged on, and with each passing minute, those mysterious sounds seemed to become clearer, more insistent. It was no longer just a vague noise now. I could swear I heard rhythmic thumps, as if someone was trying to get attention. My stomach twisted with anxiety. I knew I should stop, check what was happening, but that man's words echoed in my mind. Don't stop anywhere until Denver. The fear of the unknown fought against my conscience, which screamed that something wasn't right. That's when I saw the lights of a gas station ahead. It was one of those 24-hour stations in the middle of nowhere, with a lonely convenience store shining like a beacon in the darkness of the night. My tank was still half full, but suddenly I felt an urgent need to stop, to get out of that suffocating cab, even if just for a few minutes. With my heart pounding in my chest, I signaled and pulled into the station. I parked the truck in a more secluded corner, away from the gas pumps and the store. My hands were shaking when I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the metallic tinking of the cooling engine. and by that persistent sound coming from the trailer. I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. I knew I needed to check the cargo. No matter what those men had said, no matter the money, I needed to know what I was carrying. With wobbly legs, I got out of the cab and walked slowly towards the back of the truck. Each step seemed to last an eternity. The cold night air made me shiver, but it wasn't just from the cold, it was the fear of what I might find. When I reached the trailer door, I hesitated. The sounds were now unmistakable, rhythmic thumps and what seemed to be a muffled groan. My hands were sweating as I struggled with the padlock. Part of me wanted to turn around, get back in the cab, and pretend none of this was happening. But I knew I couldn't. With a click, the padlock opened. I took a deep breath and, with a pull, opened the door. The interior of the trailer was pitch black. For a moment, everything went silent. Then I heard a movement and a low whisper. "Help. Please." My blood ran cold. With trembling hands, I took the flashlight from my pocket and pointed it inside. What I saw made me recoil in horror. Stacked against the walls of the trailer were several large boxes, some of them moving slightly. And on the floor, partially hidden by tarps, were bodies. People. Men, women, even some children, all huddled together, with looks of fear and despair. Human trafficking. That's what I was transporting. The initial shock gave way to a wave of nausea and panic. My mind was spinning, trying to process the terrible reality before me. These people, these human beings, were being treated like merchandise. And I, unknowingly, had become an accomplice to this heinous crime. A young woman, with eyes wide with fear, reached out her trembling hand towards me. "Please," she whispered in broken English, "help us." Her gaunt, pale face told a story of days, perhaps weeks, of suffering. At that moment, I felt as if the whole world had collapsed on my shoulders. What should I do? If I freed these people, I would be putting myself in danger. Those mysterious men would certainly come after me. And my family? How could I protect them? On the other hand, how could I simply close this door and keep driving, knowing what, or rather, who I was carrying? Tears began to stream down my face as I struggled with this impossible decision. The distant sound of an approaching car made me panic. Quickly, I closed the trailer door, leaving it unlocked. I ran back to the cab, my heart beating so hard I could hear it. Sitting there, with my hands gripping the steering wheel, I knew the next few minutes would determine not just my fate, but the fate of all those innocent lives in the trailer. With trembling hands, I picked up my cell phone. My first instinct was to call the police, but fear paralyzed me. What if the traffickers found out? What if they did something to my family? But then, I remembered the desperate eyes of that woman, the children huddled in the trailer, and I knew I couldn't just ignore this. With my heart in my throat, I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, the words came out in a rushed and frightened burst. I explained the situation as best I could, giving my location and begging for immediate help. The dispatcher assured me that the police were on their way and instructed me to remain at the location. The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. Every car that passed on the road made me startle, fearing it was the traffickers coming back to check on the cargo. I alternated between nervously watching my surroundings and looking at the trailer, praying that those people would hold on a little longer. The weight of guilt and fear was crushing me. How could I have been so naive? How did I not notice before? And now, had I done the right thing by calling the police? 1,000 scenarios ran through my head, each worse than the last. That's when I saw the blue and red lights approaching in the distance. I felt a mixture of relief and terror. There was no turning back now. The patrol cars arrived with their sirens off, but the flashing lights intensely illuminated the night. My heart seemed to want to jump out of my mouth when I saw 4 police officers getting out of the cars, guns drawn. One of them approached me cautiously, while the others headed to the trailer. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. I obeyed immediately, trembling from head to toe. "I'm the one who called," I managed to stammer. "Please, there are people inside. They need help." The officer asked me a few quick questions while his colleagues opened the trailer. The sound of shocked exclamations and shouted orders filled the air. I saw paramedics arriving, running to the trailer with stretchers and equipment. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion and at high speed at the same time. I was taken to sit in the patrol car while I gave my statement. I told everything, from the mysterious call to the terrible discovery. Tears were flowing freely down my face as I watched the victims being removed from the trailer, some walking unsteadily, others being carried on stretchers. The scene was heartbreaking. The officer interrogating me tried to reassure me, saying I had done the right thing, but I barely heard him. My mind was focused on a single question: what would happen now? The following hours passed in a blur. I was taken to the police station, where I spent the night giving detailed statements. The detectives assured me that I was considered a crucial witness, not a suspect, but the fear didn't leave me. They explained that my call had triggered a larger operation against a human trafficking network they had been investigating for months. The victims I had unwittingly transported were just a small part of a much larger scheme. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The case went to trial, and I had to testify. It was terrifying to face the traffickers in court, but seeing the gratitude in the eyes of the victims I had helped save gave me strength. My life changed completely after that night. I abandoned my career as a truck driver, unable to return to the roads without reliving the trauma. I started therapy and, over time, began working with an organization supporting human trafficking victims. Guilt still haunts me sometimes, but I know I made the right choice that night at the gas station. I learned the hard way that sometimes the heaviest load we carry isn't the one in our trailers, but the decisions we make and their consequences. Today, whenever I see a truck on the road, I can't help but wonder, does the driver really know what they're transporting? My name is Sullivan, but everyone on the road calls me Sully. I've been a truck driver for over 15 years, crossing the highways of the United States from coast to coast. I thought I had seen it all in this profession, but what happened to me on an October night last year in the Colorado mountains made me question everything I thought I knew about the roads. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday, and I was doing my route from Denver to Salt Lake City, transporting a valuable cargo of cigarettes. The sky was overcast, and a dense fog was starting to form, drastically reducing visibility on the winding Highway 550, known as the $1 Million Highway, a name that always seemed ironic to me, considering the dangers it hides. I had been on the road for about 4 hours, facing the tight curves and scary precipices that border the highway, when I spotted flashing police lights in the distance. As I approached, I realized there had been a landslide completely blocking the lane. A police officer, with a tense expression on his face and deep dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept for days, was signaling for all drivers to exit the main highway and take a detour on a secondary road I had never noticed before. Reluctantly, but with no choice, I followed the instructions and entered the road. It was an even narrower path than the main one, with practically no lighting and even sharper curves. My GPS, an old but reliable model that I had affectionately nicknamed Betty, started acting strangely, constantly losing signal. I decided to trust my instincts and the rare signposts I could see in the darkness, hoping they would eventually lead me back to the main highway. As I advanced along the secondary road, a feeling of uneasiness began to take over me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the roar of my truck's engine and the occasional squeal of tires on the tight turns. The fog was becoming increasingly dense, and I could barely see beyond the headlights. The trees along the road cast strange shadows, creating shapes that seemed to move in the corner of my eyes. I tried to tune the radio for some company, but I could only pick up static and occasional fragments of distant transmissions that soon disappeared. After about half an hour on that lonely road, I began to notice something disturbing. The few signposts I could see seemed to be leading me deeper into the mountains, instead of reconnecting me with the main highway. Some of them had names of towns I had never heard of, with letters half erased and difficult to read in the darkness. My stomach churned when I realized my fuel tank was reaching half. The idea of running out of gas in that unknown and isolated place left me in a panic. I began to question whether I should continue moving forward or risk turning back and trying to find my way back, even with the risk of getting even more lost. It was then that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the rearview mirrors, I saw two headlights that seemed to have been following me for some time. It wasn't unusual to find other vehicles on the road, but something about those lights made me uneasy. They always maintained the same distance, no matter if I sped up or slowed down. The vehicle was close enough to follow me, but too far for me to distinguish its model or license plate. I tried to convince myself that it was just another driver lost like me, but a voice in the back of my mind screamed that something was wrong. I decided to do a test. At the next curve, I accelerated abruptly, exceeding the speed limit that I would normally respect, especially on an unknown road. To my discomfort, the headlights behind me did the same, maintaining the distance with frightening precision. My heart started beating faster. Who were they, and why were they following me? Did they know about my valuable cargo of cigarettes? My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I was trapped in an increasingly tense situation, running down a road that seemed to have no end, followed by a mysterious vehicle, with my fuel decreasing every minute. Panic began to take over me. My breathing became labored, and cold sweat beads ran down my forehead. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my eyes kept checking the rearview mirrors, watching those threatening headlights. It was then that I noticed something strange. The landscape around me seemed to be repeating itself. I swore I had seen that same twisted tree, that same pointy rock, at least 3 times in the last few minutes. Was I so nervous that I was imagining things, or was I really driving in circles without realizing it? Desperate for some guidance, I decided to risk calling the transport company's central office. To my frustration, there was no cell phone signal in that remote area. The device was useless there. I looked at the GPS, hoping it had recovered, but the screen still showed only static. I was completely isolated, with no means of communication and no idea where I really was. At that moment, I realized I was alone. Completely alone in this scary situation, and the only thing I could do was keep driving, hoping to find a way out or someone who could help me. Suddenly, the road made a sharp turn, and I found myself descending into a narrow valley. The rocky walls on both sides seemed to close in on me, creating a claustrophobic feeling. The fog had become so dense that I could barely see beyond the hood of the truck. It was then that I noticed something strange, small bluish lights flashing in the mist. At first, I thought they were reflections of my headlights on the water droplets suspended in the air, but I soon realized they were more intense and seemed to move independently. As I approached, the lights became clearer. Were they lanterns? Emergency beacons? My heart raced even more at the prospect of finding other people in that isolated place. I slowed down, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lights seemed to form a kind of tunnel in front of me, as if marking a path. My instinct screamed for me to stop, but curiosity, and the hope of finding help made me continue. As I advanced through the tunnel of lights, I noticed that the truck's radio, until then silent, began to emit strange sounds. It wasn't static, but a series of clicks and buzzes that almost seemed to form a pattern. I looked again at the rearview mirrors and my heart almost stopped. The headlights that had been following me had disappeared. Now I was alone on the road, surrounded by those mysterious lights and inexplicable sounds, with no idea what awaited me ahead. As I slowly advanced through the tunnel of lights, I felt a change in the air. The temperature inside the cabin dropped drastically, and I could see my own breath forming small clouds. The truck's instrument panel began to act erratically. The temperature gauge oscillated violently, and the odometer spun backward at high speed. I tried to convince myself that it was just a malfunction caused by moisture or cold, but a part of me knew that something more sinister was happening. Suddenly, the bluish lights intensified, almost blinding me. Instinctively, I stepped on the brake, but the truck continued to slide forward as if being pulled by an invisible force. The radio exploded into a cacophony of distorted voices and metallic sounds that gave me chills. Among the noises, I could distinguish loose words. Sullivan. Delivery. There's no escape. My name. How did they know my name? How did they know about the delivery? Panic took over me completely. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, struggling to maintain control of the vehicle. As it continued to advance towards the unknown, abruptly, the lights went out and the truck stopped moving on its own. I found myself in a clearing, surrounded by tall trees and a fog that seemed to have a life of its own. The truck's engine died, leaving me in a frightening silence. With trembling hands, I tried to start the engine again, but it didn't respond. The instrument panel was completely dark, as if all the energy had been drained. I looked around, trying to understand where I was, when I noticed some strange structures among the trees. They looked like antennas or towers, but of a design I had never seen before. Gathering all the courage I had left, I decided to get out of the truck to investigate. As soon as I opened the door, I was hit by an icy air and a metallic smell that made my stomach churn. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps on the damp earth. As I approached the structures, I realized they were indeed antennas, but much more sophisticated than anything I had ever seen. They had a strange, almost phosphorescent glow and emitted a low hum that made my teeth ache. It was then that I heard muffled voices and saw movement among the trees. I froze in place, torn between fear and the need for answers. The voices approached, and suddenly I was surrounded by a group of people wearing black clothes and carrying sophisticated electronic equipment. They seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see them. A middle-aged man with graying hair and thin-framed glasses approached me. "Sir, you shouldn't be here," he said in a firm but non-threatening voice. "This is a restricted government research area." My mind was spinning, trying to process the information. A secret government facility? This explained the strange lights, the electronic interference, and the feeling of disorientation. The man, who identified himself as Dr. Harding, explained that I had inadvertently entered an experimental communication technology testing zone. The lights I saw were actually reconnaissance drones, and the interference in my truck was caused by electromagnetic fields generated by their equipment. They had been monitoring me since I entered the restricted area, trying to redirect me without revealing their presence. Dr. Harding assured me that I was not in danger, but that I would need to sign some confidentiality documents before being escorted back to the main highway. As I was led back to my truck, now functioning normally, I couldn't help but feel relieved, but also intrigued. What exactly was the government testing in those isolated mountains? I left there with more questions than answers, knowing that night would forever change my perception of what really happens on the lonely roads of our country In the days that followed, I tried to resume my normal routine as a truck driver. But the experience of that night in the Colorado mountains continued to haunt me. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night on deserted roads, I can't help but look up at the sky, searching for strange lights or signs of unusual activity. I never told the complete story to anyone other than you here on the forum after all. I signed those confidentiality documents. But I always wonder how many other drivers might have had similar experiences and remained silent. One thing is certain, I never see the lonely roads of America the same way again. There are more secrets hidden in the shadows of the mountains and isolated valleys than we can imagine. And sometimes when the radio fails or the GPS loses signal, I can't help but wonder, am I about to discover another one?